The classroom was huge and filled with strange beings from across the galaxy. Professor Zethkara stood at the front, her crystal body catching the light from the ceiling. She was 10 feet tall and looked like she was made of blue glass. When she moved, her body made soft ringing sounds like wind chimes. Jake Martinez sat in the back row, the only human in the class. He was 22 years old with dark hair and brown eyes. Around him sat creatures he had only dreamed about before. Coming to the Galactic Academy, there was Veshtar, a lizard-like being with green scales and a forked tongue. Next to her floated Quintal, who looked like a cloud of purple gas in a clear suit. Behind them clicked Zakver, an insect creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that sparkled like diamonds. Professor Zethkara pressed a button on her desk. A hologram appeared in the center of the room, showing a planet that looked like a ball of sand and rock. The surface was cracked and broken, with no sign of water or plants anywhere. "Students, this is planet Zarian 7, she said. Her voice was musical but cold. It is what we call a death world. The temperature during the day reaches 60 degrees Celsius. At night it drops to minus 40 degrees. There has been no water on the surface for over 3 million years. Jake leaned forward in his seat. He had grown up in Arizona, where his grandfather had taught him about desert survival. This planet looked familiar in a way that made him both excited and nervous. "The solar radiation is deadly," Professor Zethkara continued. "The atmosphere is thin and contains almost no oxygen. The soil is poisonous to most forms of life. Sandstorms can last for weeks and move at speeds of 200 kilometers per hour." She waved her hand and the hologram changed. Now it showed charts and graphs with numbers that made the other students gasp and whisper among themselves. In the 12,000 years that the Galactic Council has studied planets like this, no known species has ever successfully lived on a Class X desert world. The Vorthan Empire tried and failed. The Scran Confederacy sent 3 colony ships and none returned. Even the mighty Klaxon swarm could not survive more than 6 months on such a world. Jake raised his hand. Professor Zethkara looked at him with what he thought might be surprise. "Yes, Mr. Martinez?" "What about underground water?" Jake asked. "Has anyone looked for aquifers or underground springs?" The professor's crystal body flickered, which Jake had learned meant she was either amused or annoyed. "Mr. Martinez, our sensors can detect water molecules at depths of up to 1,000 meters. Zarian 7 has been scanned by the most advanced equipment in the galaxy. There is no water." Jake nodded but did not look convinced. He had heard similar things said about parts of the American Southwest, places where his grandfather had found water using methods that scientists called impossible. "Your assignment," Professor Zethkara announced, "is to design a survival strategy for your species on Zarian 7. You have 4 weeks to prepare your presentations. Remember, this is theoretical. Only, we are not asking you to actually survive there, merely to propose how it might be done." The class began to buzz with excitement. Veshtar was already talking about advanced atmospheric processors. Quintal floated higher, discussing molecular recyclers. Zakver clicked rapidly about terraforming technology. Jake pulled out his tablet and began making notes, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his grandfather, Carlos Martinez, who had been a well digger in the desert for 50 years. Carlos had taught Jake things that were not in any textbook. "The desert is not empty," Carlos used to say. "It is full of secrets. You just have to know how to listen." After class, Jake stayed behind to clean up his notes. Professor Zethkara approached him, her crystal feet making tiny bell sounds on the floor. "Mr. Martinez, I hope you understand the seriousness of this assignment. Your species may be resourceful, but even humans have limits. I do not want you to waste your time on impossible solutions." Jake looked up at her towering form. "Professor, what makes a solution impossible?" "Logic, science, the laws of physics. We have studied desert worlds for millennia. We know what works and what does not." "But have you ever tried simple methods?" Jake asked. "I mean really simple ones?" Professor Zethkara's form flickered again. "Mr. Martinez, if advanced technology cannot solve a problem, primitive methods certainly cannot. Please focus on realistic approaches. Perhaps atmospheric modification or underground habitat construction. Jake nodded politely, but inside he was smiling. I understand, Professor. I'll work on something practical. That evening, Jake went to his small dormitory room. It was basic but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and communication terminal. He activated the terminal and placed a call to Earth. The connection took several minutes to establish across the vast distance of space. The screen flickered to life, showing a woman with sun-darkened skin and laugh lines around her eyes. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a work shirt covered in dust. Jake. Beth Martinez smiled at her younger brother. How's life among the aliens? Interesting, Jake said. Beth, I need to ask you something. Remember those stories Grandpa used to tell about finding water in the desert? Beth's expression grew serious. You mean the dowsing? The water witching? Yeah. Did that really work? Actually work? Beth was quiet for a moment. Jake. I've been working with the Water Reclamation Project here in Nevada for 3 years. Last month, the Geological Survey said there was no water in a 50-square-mile area. The computer models showed nothing. The satellite scans showed nothing. The ground-penetrating radar showed nothing. She paused and took off her hat, running her fingers through her short dark hair. I remembered what Grandpa taught us. I took his old dowsing rod out there and walked the grid. Found 4 water sources that the computers missed. The engineers still can't explain it. Jake felt his heart race. Beth, how would you feel about taking a trip off-world? What are you thinking, little brother? Jake explained his assignment and his idea. Beth listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful. It's crazy, she said finally. But Grandpa always said the desert teaches you things that books cannot. If there's water on that planet, traditional methods might find it. Will you help me? Beth grinned. When do we leave? The next morning, Jake submitted a formal request to the Academy administration. He proposed a live demonstration on Zarian 7, with his sister as the primary water finder. The request caused immediate controversy. Professor Zethkara called him to her office within hours. The room was filled with crystal formations that grew from the walls and ceiling. She stood behind a desk made of the same blue crystal as her body. Mr. Martinez, this is completely unacceptable. You cannot seriously propose to risk a human life on such primitive nonsense. Professor, my sister is an expert desert survivalist. She's found water in places where advanced technology failed. I think she can succeed where your sensors cannot. Your sensors? Professor Zethkara corrected coldly. And they are the most advanced in the galaxy. If they cannot detect water, there is no water to find. Jake stood his ground. With respect. Professor, maybe your sensors are looking for the wrong things? The professor's form flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Mr. Martinez, I will not allow you to pursue this foolish course of action. Choose a different approach or fail. The assignment. But Jake had already made his decision. He bowed politely and left the office. By the end of the day, he had submitted his request to the Academy's highest authority, Dr. Quexmel, the ancient headmaster who had seen the rise and fall of a dozen galactic civilizations. Dr. Quexmel was a small, wrinkled being whose species was so old that no one remembered their original name. He had been at the Academy for over 2,000 years and had a reputation for supporting unusual ideas. Jake found him in the Academy's garden, tending to plants from 100 different worlds. The old being looked up with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Young human, Dr. Quexmel said in a voice like rustling leaves, I have read your proposal. It is either brilliant or completely insane, perhaps both. Sir, I believe. My sister can find water on Zarian 7 using traditional human methods. Dr. Quexmel was quiet for a long moment, stroking a plant that glowed with soft blue light. In my long life, I have learned that the most important discoveries often come from the most unexpected sources. Very well, Mr. Martinez, you have your expedition. But if you are wrong, the consequences will be severe. Jake felt a mix of excitement and terror. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. The old headmaster smiled. I hope not, young human. For all our sakes, I hope not. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in front of the xenobiology class with a simple wooden stick in his hands. The stick was shaped like the letter Y, about 2 feet long, and looked like it had been cut from a tree branch. Around him, his classmates had set up elaborate holographic displays showing complex machines and technological marvels. Veshtar had created a presentation about atmospheric processors that could turn poisonous air into breathable atmosphere. Her display showed massive machines with spinning parts and glowing energy cores. Quinto floated beside a hologram of molecular recyclers that could break down rock and sand to create water and food. Zagver clicked excitedly as his display showed terraforming equipment that could change an entire planet's climate. Jake looked at his simple stick and smiled. He had made it himself the night before, using wood from a tree that grew in the Academy's garden. It was rough and uneven, carved with a basic knife his grandfather had given him years ago. Professor Zethkara moved through the classroom, examining each presentation with her crystal sensors. She made approving sounds at the complex technology displays and took detailed notes on each student's proposed solutions. When she reached Jake's desk, she stopped and stared at the wooden stick. Her crystal body flickered in what Jake now recognized as confusion. Mr. Martinez, where is your presentation equipment? Your holographic displays? Your technological proposals? Jake held up the stick. This is my presentation, Professor. This is my technology. The entire class went silent. Even the soft humming of the air recyclers seemed to stop. Veshtar's forked tongue flicked out nervously. Quintal's gaseous form swirled faster in his containment suit. Zagver's compound eyes focused on Jake with what looked like concern. I do not understand, Professor Zethkara said slowly. That is a piece of wood. It's called a dowsing rod, Jake explained. Also known as a divining rod or water witch. Humans have used tools like this for thousands of years to find underground water sources. He held the stick up so everyone could see it clearly. My grandfather taught me how to make them. You cut a Y-shaped branch from certain types of trees. Apple, willow, and peach wood work best. You hold it like this, with the 2 short ends in your hands and the long end pointing forward. Jake demonstrated the proper grip. When you walk over underground water, the stick moves. It pulls down toward the water. Some people can feel it strongly, others need practice. My family has been doing this for generations. Professor Zethkara's form flickered rapidly. Mr. Martinez, surely you are not suggesting that a piece of wood can detect water where our most advanced sensors cannot? Actually, Professor, that's exactly what I'm suggesting, Jake replied calmly. The principle isn't magical. It's based on small changes in gravity, electromagnetic fields, and environmental signs that trained humans can detect through the rod's movement. The class erupted in chaos. Veshtar made a hissing sound that Jake had learned meant disbelief. Quintal's gas form turned a darker purple, indicating agitation. Zagver began clicking rapidly in his native language, which the translation system rendered as a series of skeptical exclamations. Impossible, Veshtar said, her scales rippling with emotion. Primitive superstition cannot overcome the laws of physics, human. Jake remained calm. It's not superstition. It's science that we don't fully understand yet. Some humans have a natural sensitivity to magnetic fields and gravitational variations. The dowsing rod amplifies these tiny sensations, making them visible through the rod's movement. He activated his tablet, showing a simple diagram of how dowsing worked. Underground water affects the electromagnetic field around it. It changes the density of soil and rock. It creates subtle variations in temperature and humidity. A sensitive person can detect these changes. Professor Zethkara moved closer, her crystal sensors examining the wooden stick from every angle. Mr. Martinez, our sensors can detect electromagnetic variations down to the molecular level. If we cannot find water, how can a primitive tool succeed? Because you're looking for the wrong things, Jake said. Your sensors look for water molecules, humidity, chemical signatures. But water deep underground doesn't always show up that way. It affects other things, soil composition, mineral distribution, even the way air moves through tiny cracks in rock. Jake pulled up another diagram on his tablet. Humans who practice dowsing learn to read these indirect signs. The rod doesn't actually find water. It responds to the person's unconscious detection of environmental changes that indicate water presence. The classroom fell silent again. Even Professor Zethkara seemed to be considering his words. My sister Beth has been working with water reclamation projects in the Nevada desert, Jake continued. Last month, geological surveys using the most advanced Earth technology found no water in a 50-square-mile area. Computer models, satellite scans, ground-penetrating radar all showed nothing. He paused for effect. Beth went out there with our grandfather's old dowsing rod and found 4 underground water sources. The engineers still can't explain how. She did it. Quintel's gaseous form swirled thoughtfully. Even if such a thing were possible, how would it work on Zarian 7? The conditions are completely different from your Earth desert. The principles are the same, Jake replied. Water is water. It affects gravity, electromagnetic fields, and soil composition the same way on any planet. The specific signs might be different, but a skilled dowser can adapt. He clicked to his next slide, showing a detailed survival plan. The beauty of this approach is that it requires no technology that can break down, no power sources that can run out, no complex maintenance or spare parts. Just human skill, traditional knowledge, and a wooden stick. Jake's presentation continued for another 20 minutes. He explained how humans would use traditional desert survival techniques combined with dowsing to locate underground water sources. He detailed how they would dig wells using simple tools, how they would collect and purify water, and how they would build shelters that could withstand the extreme temperatures. The key is to work with the desert, not against it, he concluded. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We don't need to change the planet, we need to adapt to it. When he finished, the classroom was completely quiet. His classmates stared at him with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. Professor Zethkara stood motionless, her crystal form dim with deep thought. Finally, Veshtar spoke. Your proposal is interesting, human, but it relies on abilities that cannot be measured or verified. How do we know this dowsing actually works? Test it, Jake said simply. That's what I'm proposing. Let me and my sister go to Zarian 7 and prove it works. The class erupted again. Several students began talking at once, their voices mixing into a cacophony of alien languages. Professor Zethkara raised one crystal hand for silence. Mr. Martinez, what you are suggesting is extremely dangerous. Zarian 7 is a death world. Even with full environmental suits and advanced life support, survival would be difficult. You are proposing to go there with primitive tools. I'm proposing to go there with tools that have worked for thousands of years, Jake corrected. Professor, every species in this room has tried to colonize desert worlds using advanced technology. Everyone has failed. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. Professor Zethkara's tone became patronizing. Mr. Martinez, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but what you are proposing is not science. It is wishful thinking. Even if dowsing worked on Earth, which is doubtful, it would not work on an alien world with different physics and chemistry. Then let me prove you wrong. Jake said quietly. The professor's form flickered with what Jake now recognized as annoyance. Mr. Martinez, I cannot allow you to risk your life on such foolishness. Choose a different approach or accept a failing grade. Jake picked up his wooden dowsing rod and held it firmly. Professor, with respect, Dr. Quexmal has already approved my expedition. I'm going to Zarian 7 whether you believe in dowsing or not. The classroom fell silent once more. Professor Zethkara's crystal form went completely still, as if she were processing this information. Very well, she said finally. But understand this, Mr. Martinez. When you fail, and you will fail, it will prove once and for all that primitive methods cannot compete with advanced science. Your failure will be a lesson for future students about the dangers of ignoring proven technology. Jake smiled and tucked the dowsing rod into his backpack. Professor, I look forward to proving you wrong. As the class ended and students began filing out, Jake could hear them whispering among themselves. Some seemed excited by the prospect of seeing a human attempt the impossible. Others clearly thought he was going to his death. Jake didn't care what they thought. He had made his decision, and now there was no turning back. In 3 days, he and Beth would board a transport ship for Zarian 7. They would either make history or die trying, but as he walked back to his dormitory, Jake felt confident. He had his grandfather's knowledge, his sister's skill, and a simple wooden stick. Against all the advanced technology in the galaxy, it didn't seem like much. But Jake had learned something that the aliens hadn't. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. The desert was waiting for them, and Jake was ready to listen to its secrets. Jake sat in his dormitory room that evening, staring at the communication terminal. The screen showed a loading symbol as it tried to connect across the vast distance between the Academy and Earth. He had placed the call 3 times already, but the connection kept failing. Space communication was always unreliable, especially when calling from the Outer Rim territories where the Academy was located. Finally, the screen flickered to life. Beth Martinez appeared, her face dusty and tired. She was standing in what looked like a desert canyon with red rocks rising behind her. The sun was setting on Earth, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jake, thank goodness you got through, she said, adjusting her communication device. I've been trying to call you for 2 days. The satellite connection out here is terrible. Jake leaned forward eagerly. Beth, where are you? That doesn't look like Nevada. I'm in Utah now, working with a water survey team. Jake, after our last conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about Zarian 7 and the dowsing, so I decided to do some testing. She turned the device around, showing Jake the landscape behind her. It was harsh and barren, with cracked earth and scattered rocks. No plants grew anywhere, and the ground looked baked by years of intense sun. This area has been classified as completely dry for the past 15 years, Beth explained. 3 different geological surveys said there was no water within 200 feet of the surface. The computer models showed nothing. Ground-penetrating radar found nothing. Even the new quantum sensors that the government has been testing showed nothing. Jake felt his heart start to race. Beth, what did you find? She smiled and held up a worn wooden stick. Jake recognized it immediately. It was their grandfather's original dowsing rod, the one Carlos Martinez had used for 50 years in the Arizona desert. The wood was dark with age and smooth from decades of use. I've been out here for 4 days, Beth said. Just me, Grandpa's rod, and everything he taught us. Jake, I've found 7 underground water sources. 7. The deepest one is only 30 feet down, right where the computer said there was solid rock. Jake stood up so quickly that his chair fell over. Are you serious? You actually found water? Better than that, Beth replied. I called in the survey team to verify. They brought all their equipment, digital sensors, chemical analyzers, the works. Every single location I marked with the dowsing rod had water. Good, clean water. The engineers are calling it impossible, but they can't argue with the results. She held up a bottle of clear water. This came from a well we dug yesterday. 40 feet down in an area that was supposed to be completely dry. The water is so pure it doesn't even need filtering. Jake felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear. Beth, how would you feel about taking that rod somewhere a little more challenging? Beth's expression became serious. You mean Zarian 7? Jake, I've been reading about that planet. It's not just dry, it's deadly. The temperature swings, the radiation, the poisonous atmosphere. Even with all our gear, it would be extremely dangerous. I know, Jake said. But think about it, Beth. If dowsing can find water where the most advanced technology fails, imagine what it could do on a planet where no one has ever looked for water the right way. Beth was quiet for a long moment. Jake could hear the wind blowing across the Utah desert, and somewhere in the distance, the call of a bird. What exactly are you asking me to do? She said finally. Jake took a deep breath. I want you to come to the Academy. I want you to help me prove that human methods can succeed where alien technology has failed. I want us to go to Zarian 7 together and find water. And if we fail, then we fail together? But Beth, I don't think we will fail. Grandpa always said that water calls to water, and humans have been listening to that call for thousands of years. The aliens have never tried our methods because they think primitive means inferior. But maybe primitive means tested, maybe it means reliable. Beth looked down at the dowsing rod in her hands. You know, Jake, I've been thinking about something Grandpa used to say. He said the desert doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the truth. To everyone. Maybe these alien sensors are too sophisticated to hear what the desert is really saying. Will you help me? Jake asked. Beth smiled, the same smile she had worn as a child when they were about to get into trouble together. When do we leave? The next morning, Jake submitted his final request to the Academy administration. He asked for permission to bring his sister to the Academy as a consultant, and for both of them to travel to Zarian 7 as part of his class project. The request was more formal than his previous submissions, written in the careful language that galactic bureaucracy required. The response came back within hours. Dr. Quexmel had approved the request, but with conditions. The expedition would be supervised by Professor Zethkara and 2 other faculty members. A full medical team would accompany them, along with emergency evacuation equipment. The humans would be monitored constantly, and the expedition would be terminated at the first sign of danger. Jake was reading the approval message when his dormitory door chimed. He opened it to find Professor Zethkara standing in the corridor, her crystal form flickering with what Jake had learned was extreme agitation. Mr. Martinez, I have just received word of your approved expedition. I must protest this decision. In the strongest possible terms. Jake stepped aside to let her enter. The professor was too tall for the human-sized room, so she had to bend her crystal neck to avoid hitting the ceiling. Professor, I understand your concerns, but the decision has been made. My sister is an expert in desert survival and water location. She's found water in places where advanced technology failed. Mr. Martinez, you are asking me to risk not only your life, but the life of your sister and the entire expedition team. For what? To prove a point about primitive superstition? Jake felt his temper rise, but he kept his voice calm. Professor, with respect, it's not superstition. It's a technique that has worked for thousands of years. My sister just proved it works better than your advanced sensors. Professor Zethkara's form flickered more rapidly. Even if your dowsing worked on Earth, which I still doubt, Zarian 7 is completely different. The gravity is different. The electromagnetic field is different. The soil composition is different. Your primitive methods cannot adapt to such variations. But humans can adapt, Jake replied. That's what we do. We learn, we adjust, we find ways to survive in impossible conditions. My sister isn't just good at dowsing, she's good at reading the environment, at understanding what the land is telling her. The professor moved closer, her crystal sensors examining Jake's face. Mr. Martinez, I have studied desert worlds for over 300 years. I have seen the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy attempt to colonize such planets. The Vorthan Empire, with all their crystal technology, failed. The Klaxon Swarm, with their perfect hive coordination, failed. What makes you think 2 humans with a wooden stick can succeed where they could not? Jake met her gaze steadily. Because we're not trying to conquer the desert, Professor. We're trying to work with it. The other civilizations tried to impose their technology on the environment. We're going to listen to what the environment is telling us. Professor Zethkara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Mr. Martinez, I do not want to see you die. Despite our disagreements, you are a promising student. This expedition is extremely dangerous, even with all our safety equipment. I understand the risks, Professor, but I also understand the opportunity. If we succeed, we'll have solved a problem that has challenged the galaxy for thousands of years. If we fail, at least we'll have tried something new. The professor's form dimmed slightly. Very well, but I want you to know that I will be watching every moment of this expedition. At the first sign of danger, I will order an immediate evacuation. I will not have human deaths on my conscience. Jake nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less, Professor. After she left, Jake sat down at his communication terminal and placed another call to Earth. This time, Beth answered immediately. Jake, I've been waiting for your call. I've already started packing. When do you need me at the academy? As soon as possible. The transport leaves in 1 week. Beth's image smiled. I'll be there in 3 days. And Jake, I'm bringing more than just Grandpa's rod. I've been researching traditional water-finding techniques from around the world. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Jake felt a wave of relief and excitement. Beth, are you sure about this? Once we're on that planet, there's no turning back. Jake, do you remember what Grandpa used to say about the desert? Jake smiled. He said it keeps its secrets, but it doesn't keep them from everyone. That's right. And I think it's time we taught these aliens that humans know how to listen to secrets that machines can't hear. As Jake ended the call, he felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. In 1 week, he and Beth would board a transport ship for the most dangerous planet in known space. They would carry with them nothing but traditional tools, human knowledge, and the hope that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones. Outside his window, the Academy's artificial sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of Earth. The transport ship Celestial Dawn shook violently as it entered Zarian 7's atmosphere. Jake gripped his seat restraints and watched the heat shields glow bright orange through the small porthole. Beside him, Beth checked her equipment one more time. She had packed light, just basic desert survival gear, 3 different dowsing rods, and a small bag of tools that their grandfather had used. Professor Zethkara sat across from them, her crystal form secured in a specially designed restraint system. Her body flickered constantly with nervousness. Next to her were Dr. Vexahol, a medical specialist whose tentacles wrapped around emergency medical equipment, and Professor Morden, a planetary specialist whose thick shell protected sensitive atmospheric monitoring devices. Approaching landing zone, announced Captain Nelter from the cockpit. Surface temperature is currently 58 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels are within acceptable limits for short-term exposure. Wind speed is 45 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 70. Jake looked out the porthole as the landscape came into view. Zarian 7 stretched out below them like a vision of hell. The ground was cracked and broken, split by deep canyons and covered with orange and red sand. Strange rock formations jutted up from the desert floor like broken teeth. No plants grew anywhere. No water reflected the harsh sunlight. It was the most desolate place Jake had ever seen. Last chance to change your mind, Mr. Martinez, Professor Zethkara said. Her voice carried a note of genuine concern. We can return to the academy right now. No one would think less of you. Jake looked at his sister. Beth was staring out her porthole, but she didn't look afraid. She looked focused, like she was already reading the landscape and trying to understand what it might tell her. We didn't come this far to turn back now, Professor, Jake replied. We're going to find water on this planet. The ship touched down with a heavy thud that shook everyone in their seats. Through the portholes, Jake could see dust and sand swirling around them in clouds. The landing area looked exactly like everywhere else, flat, dry, and completely lifeless. Atmospheric. Readings confirm our data, Professor Zethkara announced, checking her instruments. No water vapor detected in the air. Surface scans show no moisture within 500 meters of depth. Soil composition is primarily silicon dioxide with trace minerals. No organic compounds detected. The ship's cargo bay opened, and immediately the heat hit them like a physical blow. Even through the environmental suits that the aliens wore, Jake could see them struggling with the temperature. The medical team activated cooling units and air recyclers, surrounding themselves with a bubble of controlled atmosphere. Jake and Beth wore simple desert clothing, loose, light-colored shirts and pants, wide-brimmed hats, and sturdy boots. They had learned from their grandfather that the best way to deal with desert heat was to work with it, not against it. Their clothes were designed to let air flow while protecting them from the sun. The environmental suits will keep us alive for up to 72 hours, Professor Zethkara explained. However, I strongly recommend that we limit our surface time to 12 hours maximum. The radiation exposure alone could be dangerous. Beth pulled out her grandfather's dowsing rod and tested its balance in her hands. The wood was dark with age and worn smooth by decades of use. Professor, we appreciate your concern, but humans have been surviving in deserts for thousands of years. We know how to protect ourselves. Dr. Vexahal's tentacles waved nervously, but not in conditions like these. The temperature extremes, the radiation, the complete lack of water, this environment is beyond anything humans have experienced. Maybe, Jake said, pulling on his gloves, but water is water. If it's here, Beth can find it. They began walking across the desert surface. The ground crunched under their feet, and small clouds of dust rose with each step. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering heat mirage. In the distance, Jake could see dust devils spinning across the plains. Professor Zethkara followed behind them, her instruments constantly scanning and analyzing. Still, no readings, she announced every few minutes. No electromagnetic anomalies. No gravitational variations. No chemical signatures indicating water presence. Beth walked slowly and steadily, holding the dowsing rod loosely in her hands. She moved in a pattern that Jake recognized from their childhood training, a systematic grid search that covered the maximum area while allowing the dowser to sense any changes in the rod's behavior. Beth, are you feeling anything? Jake asked, after they had been walking for an hour. Not yet, she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. But this place is different from Earth deserts. The electromagnetic field feels strange. The gravity is slightly different too. I need time to adjust. Professor. Morden scuttled alongside them on his 6 legs, his shell protecting delicate monitoring equipment. The readings are consistent across the entire search area. Rock and sand to a depth of 800 meters. No water, no ice, no underground rivers or aquifers. Your instruments are looking for direct signs of water, Beth said patiently. But water leaves other traces. It affects soil density, mineral distribution, even the way rocks crack in weather. Those are the signs I'm looking for. They continued walking as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The temperature rose steadily, and even Jake began to feel the strain. The alien faculty members activated additional cooling systems and moved more slowly, clearly struggling with the harsh conditions. After 2 hours, they stopped to rest in the shade of a large rock formation. The aliens huddled together in their environmental suits while Jake and Beth sat comfortably in the shadow, drinking small sips of water from their canteens. I must admit, Professor Zethkara said, you humans are more adapted to these conditions than I expected. However, we have covered nearly 3 square kilometers and found no water. Perhaps it is time to accept that this planet is truly barren. Beth stood up and brushed dust from her clothes. Professor, when my grandfather taught me dowsing, he said the most important thing was patience. The desert doesn't give up its secrets quickly. You have to earn them. She picked up her dowsing rod again and resumed walking. This time, she moved in a different pattern, following the natural contours of the land rather than a rigid grid. Jake noticed that she was paying attention to things the alien instruments ignored. The way sand had settled in certain areas, the color variations in rock formations, the patterns of erosion on hillsides. Beth, what are you seeing? Jake asked. Different things, she replied, concentrating on the rod in her hands. The way this canyon formed suggests water flow at some point in the past. Those mineral stains on the rocks indicate underground seepage. And the soil composition changes subtly as we move. Some areas have different density. Professor Zethkara checked her instruments again. My sensors detect none of these variations you describe. Because you're measuring the wrong things, Beth said without looking up from her dowsing rod. Your instruments look for what water is. I'm looking for what water does. They had been walking for nearly 3 hours when Beth suddenly stopped. The dowsing rod in her hands began to twitch slightly, then pull downward with increasing force. She stood perfectly still, adjusting her grip and testing the rod's response. "Here," she said quietly. "Water deep, but it's here." Professor Zethkara immediately activated her most sensitive scanners. "Impossible, I detect nothing. No electromagnetic anomalies, no gravitational variations, no chemical signatures." Beth walked in a small circle around the spot, and the rod continued to pull downward. "About 40 feet down, I think. Maybe deeper." "The signal is strong, but it's coming from well below the surface." Jake felt his heart racing. "Beth, are you sure?" She looked up at him with the same confident expression she had worn when they were children and she was teaching him to read animal tracks. "Jake, I'm as sure as I can be. There's water down there, double quotes. Dr. Vexahol's tentacles writhed with skepticism. "How can you possibly know the depth? Your primitive tool has no measuring capability." "Experience," Beth replied simply. "The strength of the pull, the way the rod responds, the feel of the ground under my feet. Grandpa taught me to read all these signs together." Professor Zethkara moved her crystal form directly over the spot Beth had indicated. Her most advanced sensors hummed and clicked as they analyzed every aspect of the location. "There is nothing here," she announced firmly. "Solid rock from the surface down to 600 meters. No water, no ice, no moisture of any kind." Beth knelt and put her hand on the ground. She closed her eyes and remained motionless for several seconds. When she opened them, she looked directly at Professor Zethkara. "Professor, your instruments are very advanced, but they're looking for water the way your species understands it. Water in caves, water in underground rivers, water trapped in rock formations. But water behaves differently in extreme environments. It finds ways to exist that your sensors aren't programmed to detect." Jake pulled a small drilling kit from his backpack. It was a simple, hand-operated device that could bore through rock and sand using muscle power alone. "Professor, I propose we test Beth's finding. If there's no water, we'll accept any conclusion you want to draw about human methods." Professor Zethkara's form flickered rapidly. "Mr. Martinez, you are proposing to dig 40 feet into solid rock based on the movement." The drilling began at dawn the next day. Jake and Beth took turns working the hand-operated drill, the metal bit slowly chewing through rock and sand. The work was hard and slow, but they had learned patience from their grandfather. Each turn of the handle brought them deeper into the planet's crust. Professor Zethkara stood nearby. Her crystal form dimmed with what Jake had learned was either deep thought or resignation. Her instruments continued their constant scanning, reporting the same results over and over: no water, no moisture, nothing but solid rock. 10 feet, Jake announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. The sun was already blazing overhead, turning the desert into an oven. "Rock and sand, just like your sensors predicted." "The readings remain consistent," Professor Zethkara confirmed. "No change in density, no chemical variations, no electromagnetic anomalies. Mr. Martinez, perhaps it is time to accept that your methods, while interesting, are not applicable to alien environments." Beth took over the drilling, her movements steady and practiced. She had helped their grandfather dig dozens of wells in the Arizona desert, and the technique came naturally to her. "Professor, my grandfather used to say that the earth talks to those who know how to listen. We just need to keep listening." Dr. Vexahal's tentacles waved nervously in the heat. Even with his environmental suit running at maximum cooling, he was struggling with the temperature. "This is dangerous folly. We should return to the ship before the radiation exposure becomes critical." "Give us until sunset," Jake said, taking back the drill handle. "If we haven't found anything by then, we'll admit defeat." The drilling continued through the morning. 20 feet, 25 feet, 30 feet. The bit brought up samples of rock and sand that Professor Morden analyzed with his portable equipment. Every sample showed the same thing: dry, lifeless mineral composition with no trace of water. At 35 feet, Jake felt the drill bit hit something different. The resistance changed, and the handle turned more easily for several inches. Then it hit solid rock again. What was that? Beth asked, leaning over the hole. Jake pulled up the drill bit and examined the samples. Mixed in with the usual rock and sand were small chunks of a different material, darker, more porous rock that felt different in his hands. Professor Morden scuttled over and took samples with his specialized equipment. Interesting, this appears to be sedimentary rock with a different mineral composition. However, my analysis shows no water content. Beth knelt beside the hole and held her dowsing rod over it. The rod pulled downward more strongly than before. We're close, very close. The water is just below this layer. 38 feet, Jake said, resuming the drilling. Just like you predicted. The drill bit into the new layer of rock, and immediately Jake felt the difference. The material was softer, more crumbly. The drill moved faster, bringing up samples that were darker and had a different smell. At 38 feet and 6 inches, the drill bit suddenly broke through into empty space. Jake felt the handle drop several inches with no resistance at. "Oh, we hit something," he announced. "A cavity of some kind." Professor Zethkara moved her sensors directly over the hole. "My readings show a small void, approximately 2 meters in diameter. However, it appears to be empty." Jake pulled the drill bit up slowly. As it emerged from the hole, water began to bubble up around it. First just a trickle, then a steady flow, then a gushing stream of clear, clean water that pooled around the drill site. The alien scientist stood in stunned silence. Professor Zethkara's crystal form flickered rapidly as her sensors registered readings that should have been impossible. Water was flowing from a hole where her instruments had detected nothing but solid rock. "By the 7 moons of Vorthen," she whispered. "How is this possible?" Beth smiled and capped the well they had just created with a simple wooden cover their grandfather had taught them to make. "Professor, water finds ways to exist that your instruments can't detect. This water has been trapped in a pocket between rock layers, probably for thousands of years." Jake knelt beside the well and cupped the water in his hands. It was cool and clear with no smell or a taste of minerals. "It's perfect drinking water, better than anything we expected to find." Dr. Vexahal extended his tentacles toward the water, then jerked them back as if the liquid might be dangerous. "This is impossible. Our geological surveys showed solid rock at this depth. There should be no cavity, no water reservoir." "Your surveys looked for large underground rivers and aquifers," Beth explained patiently. "But water in extreme environments behaves differently. It collects in small pockets, seeps through microscopic cracks, forms isolated reservoirs that your sensors can't detect because they're too small and too deep." Professor Morden was frantically taking readings of the water with every instrument he had. "The chemical composition is remarkable, pure H2O with minimal mineral content. No toxins, no radiation, no harmful bacteria. This water is completely safe for human consumption." "How did you know?" Professor Zethkara asked Beth. "Your dowsing rod detected this when our most advanced sensors found nothing. How is that possible?" Beth sat on a nearby rock and pulled out a simple cloth to clean her grandfather's dowsing rod. "Professor, humans have a natural sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and gravitational variations that most species don't have. The dowsing rod amplifies these tiny sensations that we feel unconsciously." She pointed to the well. "That water pocket created minute changes in the electromagnetic field around it. It affected the density of the rock layers above it. It even changed the way moisture moved through microscopic cracks in the stone. Your instruments were looking for direct evidence of water, but I was looking for evidence of water's effects on everything around it." Jake stood up and looked around the landscape with new eyes. "Beth, if there's one pocket like this, there might be others." "Definitely," she replied, holding up the dowsing rod. "I can already sense at least 3 more locations within walking distance. This desert isn't as empty as it appears." Professor Zethkara approached the well and stared down at the impossible. "Water. In 12,000 years of studying desert worlds, the Galactic Council has never successfully located water on a Class X planet. How were we so wrong?" "You weren't wrong about the conditions," Jake said. "You were wrong about the methods." Every species that tried to colonize desert worlds used the same approach, overwhelming the environment with technology, forcing it to support life through artificial means. Beth nodded. But humans learned long ago that you don't fight the desert. You work with it, you listen to what it's telling you. You find the resources that are already there instead of trying to create new ones. Over the next several hours, Beth located 17 more underground water sources using her dowsing rod. Each one was exactly where she predicted, at depths ranging from 30 to 60 feet. The alien scientists verified every location with their instruments after the wells were dug, but none of their sensors had detected the water beforehand. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red, Professor Zethkara gathered the expedition team around the first well. The water continued to flow steadily, creating a small oasis in the barren landscape. "Mr. Martinez." "Miss Martinez," she said formally, "I owe you both a profound apology. Today you have accomplished something that the greatest minds in the galaxy believe to be impossible. You have found not just water, but abundant water on a world we classified as completely barren." Jake smiled and looked at his sister. "Professor, my grandfather always said that the most important tool for survival isn't technology, it's knowledge. Human knowledge, passed down through generations, tested and proven over thousands of years. But how will this change things?" Dr. Vexahol asked. "How can the galaxy benefit from techniques that require specific human abilities?" Beth stood up and brushed sand from her clothes. "That's the beautiful thing about dowsing, Doctor. It can be taught. Humans have been teaching it to each other for centuries. With practice and patience, anyone can learn to sense what the Earth is telling them." Professor Zethkara's crystal form brightened with what Jake now recognized as excitement. "Do you mean that other species could learn these techniques?" "Some could, probably," Beth replied. "It depends on their natural sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and their willingness to trust their instincts over their instruments. But yes, the techniques can be shared." As they prepared to return to the transport ship, Jake took one last look at the desert around them. It no longer looked barren and lifeless. Now he could see it the way Beth saw it, as a landscape full of hidden resources, waiting for someone who knew how to find them, the Galactic Council would later declare. Zarian 7 suitable for colonization, the first Class X desert world ever to receive that designation. Mandatory courses in traditional human survival techniques would be added to the Academy curriculum. Scientists from across the galaxy would come to Earth to learn dowsing and other primitive methods, but for Jake and Beth Martinez, the most important victory was proving that their grandfather's wisdom was as valuable as any advanced technology.